and Hi-Techfields. John is the former co-founder and CEO of Flatirons Solutions, which designed and developed next-generation air traffic management systems for the FAA. Prior to Flatirons Solutions, John held executive and leadership roles in other public and private software companies, including IBM and Sterling Software. As an Air Force officer, he was an engineer on the space-based system that detected Iraqi Scud missile launches during Operation Desert Storm. An active entrepreneur, John's retirement is busy as he started and bought and sold several business ventures. John also dedicates his time to advising entrepreneurs, business owners, and young professionals, and frequently speaks to audiences on success, leadership, and business. He also serves on the boards of charitable organizations. John holds a bachelor's in Aerospace Engineering from Iowa State and an MCIS in Software Engineering from the University of Denver. He and his wife, Syndi, have 2 children and reside in Colorado. Go ahead, John.
Thank you, Alex. Good morning, everybody. Very much appreciate Alex and the leadership team for hosting this event. I'm familiar with its background and history, and I absolutely wholeheartedly support what it does and the benefits it provides. I also want to thank each of you for taking your time to better yourself. I know this is a voluntary activity. You're not required to do it, but you did. And to me, that speaks to your character, and it'll serve you well throughout your life. So thank you. I'm bummed that this has to be done remotely. I'd much rather enjoy the personal interaction when I speak, but there's nothing we can do about it, so we'll make the best of it. And also, just a side note, I spent the past week with my family and picked up a cold from my grandkids who are perpetual germ factories, so I apologize that I've got a little bit of a cold bug. I believe we're going to I'm going to leave time for questions at the end, and I believe the way we're going to do that is you could just type those in, and the moderators will help anybody with those, and then I'll try and field those at the end. So today I'd like to just start with an introduction or a background on myself, and I'll take more time than I normally care to do. I don't like talking about myself a lot, but I think this illustrates some important points that I'll make throughout. It kind of serves as a foundation to the experience that I've drawn and the types of things I've done to provide that experience. The other thing is I found it beneficial to learn other people's stories, to see how their career progressed, to see how they succeeded. So I encourage you all to seek out people you respect, ask them to relate their stories to you. It's incredibly beneficial to have those data points as you start to enter upon your career. So let me start. As Alex mentioned, I do live in the Boulder area here. I'm married to my high school sweetheart. We met sophomore year in high school and have been together ever since. We have 2 fantastic children. Our son is an Air Force officer and a pilot. Our daughter is a graduate of Colorado State University, and they've blessed us with 3 grandchildren. Hard to believe. I don't think I'm that old, but they're from 3 years and down. So we've been extremely blessed, and I'm happy. My career, as Alex kind of overviewed, is very diverse. I've got a very broad base of experience. And I'll start kind of at the very foundation. I was born and raised overseas. My father was an Air Force pilot, and so I was born in Japan, and I lived overseas almost all my life until right before high school, where we moved to Omaha. I attended high school in Omaha, and then I did my undergraduate work at Iowa State. As Alex mentioned, I have an undergraduate degree from Iowa State in Aerospace Engineering. While at Iowa State, I was a member of Triangle Fraternity. If you're not familiar with it, it's an organization for engineers, architects, and scientists. And as opposed to the media's stereotypical view of fraternities, this one was focused on academics, which helped me get through the difficult Iowa State engineering program. And it also created incredible learning opportunities, ones I would not have received were I to live in the dorms. Finally, it created lifelong friends. I'm an extremely outgoing person, met thousands of people throughout my life, but to this day, my closest friends are my fraternity brothers. So that organization literally changed my life and was a key to my future successes that I'll touch on next. I wanted to be an Air Force pilot my entire childhood life. That's all I wanted. But unfortunately, my eyes went bad And so I wasn't allowed to fly in the Air Force, but I still went into the Air Force and served. And I went in as an aerospace engineer, and my first job was as a satellite systems analyst. And I worked on a system that was fascinating from an engineering perspective, and that was we had a series of satellites. Much of this was very highly classified. I'm going to obviously talk about the unclassified parts now, but we had a series of satellites that were geostationary. Those of you who've done your astrodynamics, meaning they were 22,000 miles from the surface of the Earth in space. And they had infrared sensors, and we used those sensors to detect heat sources on the surface of the Earth. And their purpose was to detect missile launches during this time. It was the Cold War, the end of the Cold War in the late 80s. And so the threat of a launch of an intercontinental ballistic missile was real, and the purpose of that system. It also was able to detect smaller missiles, and I was part of the team that led the effort to enable it to detect these small missiles, which are now called Scuds, and we see those in some of the Middle East conflicts today. Fascinating job, amazing technology, and a real-world mission. After that job, I was transferred, still in the Air Force, to Florida, to the Gulf Coast of Florida, and what's called the Air Force Weapons Lab. And there I had the ultimate boy job in that this was the home of the Air Force's live fire missile range out over the Gulf of Mexico. And its purpose was to be able to test certain weapons that were under development. In this case, there was a missile called the AMRAAM, which was an air-to-air missile shot from one aircraft to shoot down another aircraft. So we would take Vietnam-era airplanes, full-scale jets, we would drone them out, fly those drones unpiloted out over the Gulf, and then take a F-15, for example, with one of our missiles on it and try and shoot down those drones. And we would have instrumented the entire flight range, the missile and everything, so that we could watch in real time how the encounter progressed. And then we can later analyze it as an engineer to see how well the systems performed. So fascinating work, really fun and interesting. But at that time, I kind of decided the Air Force was probably not a career for me, so I decided to make a change. And I left the Air Force and went to IBM, where I got into the system engineering group in the software part of their company. And then I quickly moved into management, and specifically kind of program management. While I was at IBM, I got a master's in software engineering because although I was an aerospace engineer, I seemed to gravitate towards software in my career, and I thought that that would be more beneficial to me than, for example, an MBA. I had an urge, though, after several years to start my own company, and I was trying to find a way to do that, but frankly, I didn't have any money. So I was kind of rubbing two sticks together, trying to find a way to start my company. But at the same time, a friend of mine hooked up with some venture capitalists, who you guys are probably familiar with that process. And these guys had $30 million. I had zero. So I went with the $30 million. And so I became one of the early movers in this startup company. Unfortunately, it was a failure. And I guess I'd ask you guys, if somebody gave you $30 million, I would bet almost all of you, in fact, I bet all of you could make money out of that somehow. This company did not. They found a way to never make any money. So after 18 months, I decided this company wasn't going anywhere, so I moved on. One thing I drew from that, though, is you can learn from failures, too. And I learned a ton of lessons about startups and how not to run a startup. So I finally did start my own company called Flatirons Solutions in the spring of 2001 in Boulder. It took every penny I had, literally, savings funds, college funds, all those things going into it because, again, I did the route where I did not get venture capital. I wanted the control. I did not want investors, and I learned my lessons from that prior experience. Well, that was the spring of 2001, which was an economic recession, and 6 months after we launched, 9/11 happened. And I'm sure you're all aware, after 9/11, the entire world went into basically a depression. Economically, it was extremely tough. We came within a few weeks of actually having to shut down the company. But we managed to eke it out. And then from that point on, in the spring of 2002, we had incredible success and incredible growth. We were able to garner a number of awards, but just some that you might recognize. The Inc. 500 recognizes the fastest growing companies in the world. And you have to be 5 years in business. So you have to be 5 years before you could do it. And it's the growth in those 5 years. In our first qualifying year, so our fifth year, we ranked 87th on the Inc. 500, which is incredible for a self-financed company. And in fact, in our industry, we were fourth. So very blessed with the success we had. I sold that company in 2007 and I retired. And I was very blessed that I never have to work again. But probably like many of you who have the engineering gene in you, I'm not the type to sit around and play golf. And so I immediately started doing some other things. As Alex mentioned, I bought and sold several businesses, started others. I bought a flight school because I'm an aviation fanatic, and later sold that. I started a custom home building company because I had an idea on how to do home building in a more engineering manner. I am heavily invested in commercial real estate and created kind of financial models of how I do that. And then I spend a lot of time like this speaking, trying to give back. It's one of my passions is to return back some of the blessings that I've received to be able to help people such as yourselves. I'm on the boards of several nonprofits. I spend a lot of my time and my money on nonprofit entities, and I like to speak to young people. And out of that, I've come to where I advise a lot of startup companies, primarily tech companies, but not always, just people who need help with their businesses. And so I spend a lot of time mentoring and advising people. So I tell you all of this long history to illustrate a point that I see a lot of young people like you stressing with early on in their college careers or their careers, and that is they're really stressed about their path. What's their career going to be? Sometimes it's a very stressful kind of thing where they can't decide which way they should go. What I tell you, and I tell a lot of people, is there are an infinite number of paths to success. And you can't predict which one it's going to be. I would have never, ever predicted the path that I had. Like I said, I started out to be an Air Force pilot. That's all I was going to do. My career was nothing like that, yet it was very successful. So you want to keep as many options open as possible. I played baseball at Iowa State there, which no longer, unfortunately, has a baseball program, but my coach at Iowa State was a pretty prolific guy. He had many, many sayings, most of which, unfortunately, are too colorful to be able to use in presentations like this. But he had one saying that stuck with me. He said, luck is where preparation meets opportunity. So what I encourage you to do throughout your college career is prepare. Prepare in a number of ways, and I'm going to give you some specifics here shortly, because you never know when those opportunities are going to come. But when they come, if you have prepared, you can seize them, and that's the key to success. So when I speak, I get asked to speak on topics like success, leadership, entrepreneurialism, and it's often to young people, which I thoroughly enjoy. I take seriously what I do, and I know that a lot of times in situations like this, the old guy will sit and regale people with stories about their history and things that don't really apply and it doesn't benefit people. So I take to heart that you guys are taking your time to do this. So my responsibility is to give you some really specific things that will really benefit you. And again, because I'm an engineer, I'm very pragmatic and practical. So throughout my career, I've amassed a great deal of what I call core principles, kind of strategies, techniques, things that served me as a leader, as a manager, an executive, an entrepreneur. And not things that just benefited my career, but that things that as a CEO, I would look for in younger people in my organization as traits or characteristics that they have when I was trying to identify people who I could groom into leadership positions. So again, these are practical, kind of pragmatic things. And many are things you can practice now, and I'm going to give you some of those today. And their college time is a great time to practice them. We've only got a limited amount of time today, so I'm only going to give you a couple, but I feel like these will be beneficial to you, and I like to hear your feedback. So we'll start with the first, what I call success principle, and that is that success requires leadership. Leadership is number one. Obviously, this is a leadership conference, so it's very applicable. All of the things I discuss here, a leader either has or does. Most of you have probably heard the term born leader. She's a born leader. Frankly, I don't like that term because it has a connotation that either you're born a leader or you don't have it. Either you got the gene or you didn't. And I just don't buy that by any means. I would venture to guess that all of you, being in engineering programs, know how to do algebra. Algebra. Were you a born algebra doer? No, none of us were. You were taught by a teacher, you read a textbook, and then you did problems, i.e., in other words, you practiced. So you can learn to be a leader as well, but it takes the same kind of process. You have to focus on learning. You have to put in the effort, the practice, doing those problems over and over and over. Use that same technique to develop your leadership skills. And your remaining college career gives you a ton of opportunities to learn and practice. And to practice in an environment where the stakes aren't very high. I see a lot of people when I was leading companies who came out of college and they didn't have the leadership experience. And so their first experience was in the business world, where there's a lot more significant consequences if you fail in leadership. And leadership often is failure when you're developing your techniques and your tactics. So you want to practice now where the cost of failure, if you will, is a lot less than when you're in the business world, where you can impact your business significantly, or you might not get the bonus because you didn't do as well. So I encourage you, seek out opportunities to lead in your college career and take advantage of them. It's a huge differentiator as you enter the workforce. So what are some of the ways you can practice while you're in college? Well, my number one is join a fraternity or sorority. It's one of my best experiences, and it presents many, many opportunities to lead because it's full of people, it's full of activities and things where you can step in at small or large levels of responsibility. Additionally, the seeds of my business success and entrepreneurialism were sown at Triangle. I'm convinced Greek houses are small businesses with budgets, personnel, roles, etc., and all those parts must be managed for the fraternity or sorority to succeed. If you don't join a Greek organization, I encourage you to find a club. Actually, I'd say several clubs. And do more than just attend a few meetings and sit in the back so that you can put that on your bio when you're interviewing. Seek out leadership positions. Get into those positions so that you can have real-world experience and practice those leadership skills. So let me talk about a couple more ways that you can develop things that will help support your leadership, because these are critical to being a good leader. So the second success principle I call talk the talk, and that's communication. I could give an entire presentation on communication. And if you're going to focus on any one specific skill besides leadership in general, it's this: communication. Most people are not good communicators, and unfortunately, especially engineers. Obviously, we spend a lot of time in the books, running numbers, looking at data, those types of things, and we don't spend as much time practicing how to communicate. So it's an area that if you are an engineer and you develop your communication skills, you can differentiate yourself from your peers, but you must work on it. Like I mentioned, it takes practice. I believe one of the key reasons for my success is my communication skills that I developed early, because I found very few people, as I look back on my career, who could communicate a technical problem, some technical software issue. I could go into a client that was a Fortune 100 CEO, and I can abstract that technical concept to a level that he could understand or she could understand. The very next minute, I could go down and talk to the software engineer who was working that problem, and I could understand the technical details that he was working with. So as engineers, we have that opportunity to span those. And we have a huge workforce advantage going in if you take advantage of it. Because as an engineer, you're going to be working on the difficult technical parts of a project within your company. And because you're an engineer, obviously you understand those things. You understand that complex technology. So you can easily speak to the engineering details, right? It's kind of in your nature and it's comfortable to you. So if you eventually want to get into management or become a technical leader or something like that, all you have to learn is some of the additional kinds of things, like maybe a little bit of accounting, a little bit of project management principles, those kinds of things. And compared to engineering, those things just aren't that hard. But look at it from the other way, your peers, someone seeking management from the other side. Let's say somebody has an accounting degree or even maybe an MBA, and they're getting into management and they're managing engineering programs. They'll struggle trying to understand the technical engineering details. They may understand the other things, but they're going to have a hard time with the technical ones. So if you communicate well, you will maximize your value to your organization, which should be one of your objectives. So how can you better communicate, especially now where you are? Again, similar to our method that I talked about, practice this skill. It's a skill that needs to be developed through practice. It doesn't just arrive, but you can develop it. So let's talk about a few techniques in the limited time we have. The first is oral communication. Right now, when you're in your college environment, proactively seek out and identify opportunities to speak. Many people let these opportunities slip by. And what I mean by that is I'm, excuse me, not talking about like this, where you're standing up in front of a bunch of people, which obviously most people are not comfortable with. But there are a huge number of opportunities that you're going to encounter in the normal course of your college career where you can actually practice your speaking skills. So let me talk to a few of those. Let's say you are either in a fraternity or sorority, or maybe you're in a study group, or you're doing a class kind of project where you're working with other people, and you need to give a status update. Where are you? Maybe you're organizing a fundraiser kind of event or some social event, and you have to give that update on the status of it to another group of people. Most people in your situation in college would maybe think about it for about 30 seconds before they had to talk, and then they would ramble through the process, through that. But what I encourage you, excuse me, this cold is coming to me now. What I encourage you to do is use that opportunity to practice. So prepare before that little status meeting. Prepare what you're going to say. Plan your transition between your points. Make sure things are organized in a manner that you could step your audience through it in a way they stay with you. Work on your pauses or those types of things, because you can be practicing and improving yourself and no one even knows it. But you can't let that opportunity go by. So don't just wing those opportunities. Take the opportunity to practice. And then the follow-up point is that once you're done with your little status, take a moment to self-assess and be honest and objective in critiquing yourself. How did you do? Did you still have those pauses or those bad transitions? Were you not as organized? Did you talk too fast? Make a note to yourself, and the next time you have an opportunity, incorporate those kinds of things. Believe me, if you start to think about speaking opportunities like this, you'll get a huge amount of speaking practice before you leave college. Next is written communication. I know a lot of people don't focus on that as much in today's day and age because we have these quick means of communicating through texts or things like that, but it's still critically important. When you get in the business world, you'll often be asked to write something. If you're pitching an idea that you have about your engineering program or something like that, you're going to have to write it. So you need to practice these skills as well. I'll just hit on these really quickly. Number one, don't correspond written correspondence like you text. Don't use misspelling, shortcut words, emojis, those kinds of things. Spell correctly. Learn how to spell. It's a first impression kind of thing. If somebody sends a written correspondence, including an email to me, and they've got misspellings or the wrong use of a word in there, I take away from that they just aren't that sharp. And you don't want that. You don't want people having that impression of you. So practice, practice, practice. When you send an email to somebody, a professor, when you're doing a blog post, anything like that, again, is another opportunity to practice if you seize it and you see it that way. So focus on that and practice on it. The next success principle, I'm checking my time here, is what I call Jay Leno. And Jay Leno was the former host of the Tonight Show. And I call this Jay Leno because my point is for you to get comfortable with and around people. You know, some young people are very introverted, especially engineering types, technical types. We just tend to be more introverted. But as you've heard in my prior points, you're not either born introverted or not. You can develop skills to become outgoing, but you have to, again, work on them and practice them. So one technique I use is, I'm sure you guys know somebody in your circles, somebody in high school, somebody now in your college circles who is just outgoing. They're good at meeting people. They're good at talking to people. They're easy to talk to, all of those kinds of traits. Watch them. How do they do it? Learn from them. How do they start a conversation? What topics do they raise when they're doing that? How do they keep a conversation going? There's a lot of techniques that you can learn, and you can learn those from watching people who are good at doing it. The next thing you could practice is to be outgoing. Now, this will put you out of your comfort zone for most people, but it's critical, and it's critical for your life skills, including in your business career. So how many of you, when you're around a group of people, let's say you're at a social function where you don't know everybody, or maybe you're standing outside a big lecture hall waiting for your class to begin, and you have to wait outside before the class before you releases, and you're standing around with all of your peers, all people your age, similar interests and all that, and the first thing you do is pull out your cell phone and start checking your Facebook posts. Don't do it. Force yourself to keep that phone in your pocket and don't do it. Have your head up, look around, make eye contact with somebody, and start a conversation. It's an amazing way to practice, and you'll meet an incredible number of people. I taught my kids growing up from a very young age, and when they started, they weren't big fans of it, but I said, if anybody gets within 3 feet of you, talk to them. Start a conversation, because that's the way you practice. And that's how you become an outgoing person and one that's easy to talk to and with. So I'd make a goal if I were you. Make a goal in your college environment that you're going to meet 3 people every day. And it might just be a small little conversation. Hey, how's it going? But make a goal. Talk to people. Get your face out of your phone, and you'll be different than the majority of your peers. The next success principle I'm going to talk about, I'm not going to name until the end of it, because I want you to kind of think about it as I go. You know, when most people look at the CEO role, and when I had the chance to do an interactive presentation, I asked people to throw out some adjectives, adverbs, what they think a CEO is. And, you know, I get a bunch of the stereotypical things about, you know, boss, you know, bossy, rich, powerful, all of those kinds of things. So I allow, you know, this discussion go on, but obviously we can't do that interactively today. But I would venture to say that if I were there with you and I asked, I could give quite a bit of time in this presentation and no one would guess. One of the key characteristics of a leader and a CEO. So I'll just come out and say it, it's loneliness. And most people are pretty shocked by that because they think obviously a CEO is pretty personable and they've got a lot of people around him and things. So I'm not talking about social loneliness, you know, like somebody to go have a beer with. I've got a lot of those types of people. I'm talking about kind of what I call true loneliness. You know, with the benefit of being the boss comes a lot of responsibility, and it's enormous, weighty responsibility and unimaginable pressure and stress. Because although you're surrounded by an executive team who are more than willing to throw their 2 cents in on a matter, you and only you as the leader have to make the final decision. They don't. I can't tell you how many nights I've spent lying awake wrestling with critically important and extremely difficult decisions, like having to lay people off or to make a risky business decision that could have a negative impact on the company if it fails. They were some of the loneliest times of my life, honestly. Let me apply this directly to you in your role as a young student. Let's say it's 3 a.m. and you're studying for a critically important physics midterm and you're behind the curve. You started studying too late, or you just don't understand the material. You know, you may not pass this test. It's going to affect your GPA and hence internship opportunities, job prospects. Or maybe you have a scholarship that's at risk if you don't do well. Immense pressure. I'm sure you guys have found yourself, even if you're freshmen, you probably found this in high school as well, but you had this incredible pressure on you, and you've been in this situation. I know I have, because when I was in high school and college, I had those exact same those same feelings and situations, and you're totally alone. And what do you do to get some comfort, to feel some relief from all that pressure and all that anxiety? Do you pick up your cell phone and text your buddy? Is that the relationship that's really going to help you? If he even answers or she answers, because they're probably asleep, and you tell them your situation, that you're behind on studying for this physics test, their answer is probably going to be like, dude, you're totally screwed. And then they're going to hang up. Not real helpful. So that's the kind of loneliness I'm talking about. Pressure, massive ramifications. It's on you and only you. And I'll give one more example that reinforces my point and causes me great concern as I interact with college students and young people. Something I have been investigating has me just gravely concerned that one of the statistics shows that your generation is the most connected generation in the history of the world. You've got information at your fingertips 24/7 with your phones and your computer devices. But studies also indicate that the members of your generation are the most lonely. I don't have to tell you about the rate of suicides among young people. I'm certain most of you can name someone you knew who took their own life. It's horribly tragic. And how desperate do you think somebody needs to feel, to commit suicide? It's just a terrible thing that we all should try and address. So what do? You're a CEO at 3 a.m. lying awake. You're students studying at 3 a.m. Panicking about this test. I'll tell you what I did, not only during those situations, but throughout my life. That's been an amazing salvation to me. Because you see, I did have a relationship that helped me during those times. Somebody that I could turn to at any time. Wasn't a friend, wasn't my spouse or a coworker or a mentor or even a fraternity brother. I had a relationship with God. And in those moments, I could pray and talk to God. And that gave me the peace, the calm, and the comfort, and actually hope to tamp down that despair that I was feeling. So that's the relationship you need most of all in your life. And that's who you can be sure will be there at any time. Because if you have a relationship with God, you'll never, ever be alone. Now, I know this is not a topic you hear people talk about outside of church, and you especially don't hear it on today's college campuses. But I want to honestly tell you, when you ask me about my success, that's a critical factor. And it's important for me to impart it to you. I hope you take it to heart. So just like my other success factors, I have some practical steps you can take. I'm not going to talk theology, and I honestly don't care what religion you are. I'm Catholic, but Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, whatever your faith, have a relationship with God. If you don't believe in God, at a minimum, you need to believe in something higher than yourself. Know what that is, work on it, and strengthen it. On campus where you are, seek out a faith group. Go to a meeting or a social function and check them out. I've got personal experience with one group that's called the Fellowship of Catholic University Students. It's called Focus. If you don't have strong faith belief or know where to start, go to one of their meetings or go down the street there to St. Thomas and go to a social gathering. It's not church. You're not going to get the Bible beat over your head. It's just to hang out with your peers. Check them out. Very non-threatening. And I guarantee you'll meet some incredible young men and women in these groups, ones that have their priorities straight and ones that'll probably become lifelong friends. I know this because my daughter did just that up at Colorado State. So as you start your career, you need great friends. And you might even get another benefit too, that you may actually meet your spouse at one of those meetings. So having a relationship with God, I call this critical success factor. Develop your 24/7 relationship. So I'm going to give a little check on time. I've given you some information that I think will benefit you, and I hope it does. And I offer myself to answer any questions later that you might have. But now I'd like to ask something of you, and it's based on a concern I have that's been building for some time, and it's seeming to escalate in its pace. We are engineers, we're scientists. The foundation of our profession is objectivity. The scientific method was established to ensure our work standards stand up to the highest scrutiny. because often what we do is mission critical or it's life impacting. But with too much frequency, I've seen scientists today sacrifice their objectivity and the scientific method on the altar of cultural virtue signaling. The culture, social media, Twitter, frankly, the mob determines the acceptable stance on an issue and shouts down anyone who disagrees. And unfortunately, our universities are full of these types of, quote, scientists. But it's not limited to universities. You know, I could cite a long list of examples, but in the interest of time, let me just give you a couple. And these are ones that are current, so I think you can relate to them. Now, they're hot button topics that most people would probably not raise in a keynote address like this, but I'm concerned with our country, and for our profession, the engineering profession. And so I believe that it's something that we need to be able to talk honestly and openly about. So I'm willing to step up and speak out about it, even if it goes against the grain. Here's my current example. We've all been living with COVID, obviously something new to us, and there's been a lot of ramifications as a result. But I find that factual information on the virus, including factual information on mask effectivity, is very difficult to find. And I'll give you a specific example that involves science, which is who we are. The CDC's position historically is that masks, except professional N95 masks that are properly worn by professionals, i.e. in a medical environment, are ineffective in limiting the spread of a virus. Furthermore, the negative health effects of prolonged wearing of masks are severe. That was the CDC's position and the medical community's position, frankly, until March of this year. So what changed? They had published information, studies, papers, and all that. So what changed? What changed was the media, social media, and the tech giants, Google, Facebook, YouTube, began the narrative that masks prevent the spread. And then the online indoctrination and shouting got very loud. So what did the CDC do? The CDC, a group of scientists, doctors, medical people, scientists, analysts. What did they do with their science-based information? They caved. They changed their position. The science behind their position didn't change. No one proved that their scientific analysis was wrong. The crowd just didn't like the answer, so they shouted it down. And this same type of process has been used repeatedly to promote this false information about the COVID virus and shut down anyone, including learned practicing doctors, who don't follow that cultural narrative. It should be concerning to all of us as scientists, because we want to live in a world, and especially a country, where as scientists we can objectively look at information. We can parse through the data, and then we can communicate that to people and have a discussion on how then we can respond to it and better address it. As a little side note, one of the other things that I follow is an extreme frustration to me as a technologist and as a software technologist, and that tech companies are one of the biggest perpetrators of this. Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Google, they'll deplatform you or block certain posts saying it's, quote, false information. Besides the free speech issue of letting people say whatever they want, who's the person at Twitter, who's the programmer that's so smart and knowledgeable that they know more than practicing doctors? We should all be concerned about that. So I want to give you a way that we all can address it. I don't just want to, I always look for a solution to things and an action that we can take. I believe it's a serious issue for our society. We don't want to live in a world where the crowd decides the science of an issue and then shouts down anyone who disagrees. It's also a serious issue for our profession. What's an engineer's value? Or frankly, who needs us if some thought bureaucrat already decided the outcome of the scientific issue? So here's my challenge to you. I implore you today to make a personal commitment to, number one, think for yourself. Don't succumb to groupthink, especially the kind on social media. Number two, purposely research the other side of an issue. especially if you tend to agree with one side. It's a great life skill to be able to objectively evaluate information and form your own conclusion. And finally, number 3, set a personal plank in your ethics library to speak up and challenge people when you see an instance where cultural bias is affecting one's work, even if it's your professors. It's difficult, but if we all do it, we can get back to normalcy in our profession, and we can save the value of the engineering profession. So I'd like to close on a lighter note. You know, I've interacted frequently with young people, as I mentioned, and I'm incredibly impressed with people like yourselves who take their own time, like this weekend, to better themselves. And I've always been impressed with how focused your generation is on your careers. I can say that I wasn't as much when I was your age. So I think that's a credit to you, and I respect that. But sometimes it brings a lot of pressure and additional stress, in addition to all the other things that you're dealing with. So I want to remind you to don't forget that as you're doing your planning, to set other goals too, especially fun ones. And I'll give you an example. I have a literal bucket list where as I come up with things that I want to do in my lifetime, I write them down. And I work to check them off. I want to accomplish those things. And as an example, a few years ago, I did one of my major ones. I bought the largest boat I thought I could operate solo, and I cruised it from Fort Lauderdale all the way through the Caribbean, 6 months straight. Just no schedule, no timeline, just meandering, exploring all of the different islands and countries and cultures. And as it turns out, according to many real captains I met along the way, because, by the way, I had never done anything like this before in my life, didn't have a boating license, anything like that. And as many captains told me along the way, as I told them my story, they said, "You're an idiot," basically, that I was crazy to do something like that. But have big, bold, audacious goals. Have ones that are going to be something that you can put out there on your bucket list that you're striving for in your career. And they may not happen in the next year, 5 years, or 10 years, but have those types of things that give you that excitement to do and achieve things that are beyond just your career. So I want to thank you today for the opportunity to speak with you. Thank you for your time and your dedication to your career. It warms my heart to see the engineering profession be left in the hands of people like you. So I challenge you and I offer my help. If there's anything I can do in the future to help you, by all means, reach out to me. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, John. If there's any questions, you can throw them in the Q&A, or you can message me directly as a host. All right, looks like we got some. All right, so can you see the Q&A, John?
Yes, I can.
Okay, otherwise I can just read them out to you.
The first one I see, or the only one I see, is what are some of the best resources to get factual information? That's a fantastic question. Unfortunately, it's one of the challenges today. As I was researching this, I wanted to confirm the date that, for example, the CDC made their change in guidance about masks. And so I did a Google search, and obviously, like you guys, I'm a technologist, I'm a software guy, I know databases. So I put in the exact string that I knew would give me the hit that I wanted, which was the date they changed their guidance. It took me 5 Google pages to scroll past the first 5 before I got to that piece of data. All of the other ones were from, quote, news sources that I don't have a lot of respect for, who were basically cheerleading the decision to switch to masks. So I couldn't find what I was looking for, even though it was very specific. And I think there's a bias within Google, frankly, to do that. But it takes some searching. What I'd offer is that, again, try and read a number of different sources, and also understand where the source is coming from, where their funding comes from, where their positions lie, where they stand on issues. And by doing that, you may not be able to find somebody who's solely objective. We all have built-in biases. It's human nature. But if you understand where somebody's bias might lie, then you can filter that as you analyze the data. So seek out differing opinions and seek out multiple differing opinions. And then you'll get used to where you find good information, where you don't. And you'll train yourself to analyze a bunch of different information and come to your own conclusion, which is a great skill as an engineer and a technologist, but it's also a valuable skill as a person as you mature into your life and family. Next question. How did you figure out what your startup company wanted to do? Another great question. You know, a lot of people ask me these, when I give these talks, they ask me, you know, like, what's the next Google? What's the next Facebook? Tell me, because I'm gonna work on it, I'm gonna start it. And I have a different opinion on those types of things. There are only so many of those absolute grand slam home run types of companies, but you can be extremely successful without having one of those. Most of you probably haven't heard of my company called Flatirons Solutions. We were, you know, internationally known, but not by most people like Facebook is. But we were very successful, and it allowed me to be very successful. So here's a way that I tell you to think differently. Obviously, if you can think of new ideas, something that hasn't been invented, power to you. It's fantastic. That's what we technologists and engineers do. But I also encourage you to think a little differently, which is take something that exists today and find a better way to do it. If you really look at Facebook as an example, Facebook didn't invent, you know, the social media kinds of things. It wasn't the first company to do that. They just did it better. Remember MySpace? MySpace actually started before Facebook, but Facebook did it better. So if you're struggling and you're trying to think of a way to start your company, think of a way to do something better. With my company, when I was with IBM, we were in a field called enterprise content management, and I just thought some ideas on how we can do content management differently, and as a result, I wanted to try that. So I had an idea going in from the work that I had already been doing. How do you handle work-life balance? Man, you guys are like home runs on the questions. Amazing. It is a challenge. What I can tell you is that while you're in the stage you're in right now, and when you first get into your career, set your priorities. I have another talk that I give, or another plank within talks that I give about some of these concepts of how to plan. But in short, what I would encourage you to do is you set your boundaries before you start. For example, when I started my company, I have had friends that have done startups. I'd read a lot of books to prepare, and everybody said basically prepare to live and sleep in your office. You might as well put a cot in there because you're going to be there 24/7. You're going to get divorced, and your kids are going to hate you. That basically was the life of an entrepreneur when I started. And I just said, no, I reject that. I'm not going to allow that to happen. So what I did is I set out my personal boundaries, and I said, I'm not going to do those things. I may not be as successful as somebody who did, but I believe I can still be successful. So as an example, I set a limit that every night, as long as I wasn't traveling somewhere where I wasn't home, I would be home for dinner. So I could sit down and have dinner with my family and my kids and have great conversation, and I could help them with homework or whatever was needed. And so I'd go into work very early, but people knew that I was leaving at 5:30 or so because I was going home for dinner. Now, I had an entire setup in my house, and this was way back before all the tools that exist today, but where I could, after my kids went to bed, 9 or 10 o'clock, I'd go back and work again. So it was a lot of hours, but it didn't affect my family as much. So that's a way you can look at the problem differently and set your own boundaries to manage that work-life balance. Are there any books you recommend? And another one. I have so many that it's hard to pick out a few, but I would encourage you, leaders are readers. It's a fact. Read as much as you can. I know when you're in an engineering curriculum that's as hard as Iowa State, it's hard to have reading on the side. You just don't have the time, but you can start building your library, and you can have something that you just get a little relief from your engineering with, or when you finally get to summer or something, you can read. I encourage you to read biographies of people from a wide walk of life. Just like I did in my introduction, you can learn a lot from how people's careers progressed, and you'll find kind of job opportunities or techniques and things that you didn't think of. Obviously, you can read leadership books. I'm not as huge a fan on leadership books just because a lot of times they're very academic and they talk about kind of big organization things, and I'm more pragmatic. But I would say there's some books that are really simple. One, Leadership Secrets of Attila the Hun, kind of a weird name, easy read, but it's a very good book to read. But just read books. I've read books, these are years past, but things that are different. One was called First Break All the Rules. So this author's thing was how to think differently in a business environment, especially a big company environment. So if you'd like, you could reach out to me. We could talk further about those, but just read as a leader. How did your experience living in Japan affect your career life? What positives of Japanese culture you see missing from ours? I'll broaden that question in not just Japan, but Asia, because I spent most of my life in Asia. When I was in Japan, I was very young, so I don't remember a lot of Japanese specific, but then in later years, I lived in the Philippines and Thailand. I traveled around Asia quite a bit. Most people would say, oh my gosh, that must have been terrible, moving all the time and having to lose your friends and make new ones and all those things. And actually, to me, it was a blessing. Number one, I got to experience other cultures, which was an incredible benefit to me. Number two, I got to learn how to meet and interact with people who were different than me. And that was a great experience. So there are a lot of things that you can learn from other cultures, but I'd say I'd net it out. Instead of talking out specific things, I would just say you have to be open to observe a culture and to truly learn from it instead of coming in with your bias. What advice do you have for someone with anxiety who wants to develop speaking and communication skills? That's exactly why I didn't say, go sign up for something where you're going to give a speech in front of a whole bunch of people. You can start with these small things. Like I said, if you're in a little study group and you have to talk, use that as a speaking opportunity. It's very non-threatening because it's friends, it's peers, but you can learn from that. You can practice. You can self-assess. How did I do? And when you start that way, you become more confident. And speaking is about confidence. So if you start small in those small groups, and again, you have to force yourself to treat them as a speaking opportunity instead of just not prepare or ad lib. And if you start out small like that, pretty soon you get more and more confident speaking because you learn how to make transitions better. You learn how to get rid of your pauses and those kind of other speech types of things. Once you get that confidence, you'll find it starts to expand. Next thing you're talking in front of 10 people, and then you're talking in front of 15 people. And pretty soon, the number of people doesn't even matter because you're confident in how you can communicate. So start small and take advantage of those opportunities. I think that's all of them I see, Alex. Plus, we might be running out of time.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
From your experience, what financial decisions or investments should a 21 to 22-year-old young engineer make? The way I answer this is, number one, a lot of times, like when I was, I didn't have any money to invest, but it doesn't mean you can't start your learning. So you can be learning, again, same technique for leadership and all these other skills. You can teach yourself. So you can start reading books about investing. You can start, there's apps out there now that are amazing, but you can practice investing with practice money and you can see how you do. So I'd encourage you to read and learn now so that when you do get to a point, maybe you're in the workforce and you have an opportunity with some, with your paycheck to start putting some money into investments that you know exactly what you're going to do at that point. So I guess I wouldn't say specific investments right now, not knowing your exact situation, but read and learn and practice now so that when you do get to the point where you can make those investments, you're informed about it.
All right, John, looks like we're running out of time. Thank you for taking the time to give a presentation this year. I know everybody everybody benefited from it. Thank you to everyone who attended the keynote. At 10:10, our next breakout sessions will start. So be sure to get into the correct rooms that you signed up for. And if you have any other questions for John, I'm sure he'd be happy to give you some contact information to reach out to him.
Yeah, I can do that through Alex offline, but thank you all very much.
All right. Thanks, everybody.